Are you happy to be here this morning? Those of you who are, you can hopefully look around and see who's not here and therefore appreciate that you have the privilege of being here, that you're in good health, and then pray for others to be so they can join you hopefully by this time next week. Are you thankful this morning for the cross? There's a lot to unpack about the cross. The cross of Jesus Christ, the crucifixion of our Master, the salvation that was bought and paid for by that offering on the altar of that cross, was an action undertaken by the God-man as a culmination of planning and purposing and very particular maneuvering of the chess pieces of the proverbial board of this world by the power of God, not just over the course of 3 years, not just over the course of 33 years, not even over the course of 3,000 or 4,000 years, going back to Eden and God speaking his prophecy that would culminate at the cross, but going back to before there was time itself, going back to what Paul calls in Ephesians 1, the foundation of the world. The plan for your salvation was in the mind of God. Before you ever were to have sinned, God knew you would be and knew what you would do, and had it eternally in his mind the way in which he would bring you back to him. He did that through the cross. But getting from the eternal mind of God, and then when time begins in the week of creation up until that moment culminates in the cross of Christ, God didn't just plan and then just carry it out from Eden until the cross 4,000 years later. God didn't just plan it and then just sit back and do nothing and then say, okay, now's the time, flip the switch, and there goes Jesus. But rather, from that time, Eden, up until the time of the cross, God was active in this world. And the ways in which he was active can be broken into one of two categories. The big ones, the wondrous ones, the awe-inspiring ones, the ones that we tell our bedtime stories about and we talk about the Bible to our children, those are the big miracles that God did. Those big, amazing, eye-grabbing, attention-grabbing moments that God directly, supernaturally intervened in the ordinary of this world. And he said, no, I'm going to do this because that's on the road to Calvary. The parting of the Red Sea is one of those great examples. The fall of the walls of Jericho is one of those great examples. The victory of Gideon over the Midianite army is one of those great examples. And on you could go. The defeat of David over Goliath, and on you could go, where God took some supernatural hand, whether it's knocking down walls or whether it's allowing a small little army to conquer a big one, or guiding a rock into the skull of a great giant warrior. One way or another, God intervened directly into the affairs of this world, miracles, the supernatural actions of God. On the other hand, there are countless other times and ways. And unlike with miracles, they're not easily identifiable. Countless times and ways in which God intervened in this world, but not in a supernatural way, but rather did so in a providential way. If you're looking at the bulletin, you can see the big word highlighted and read for you. That's the subject matter for our sermon this morning, the providence of God. See, it's the fun ones to talk about are the miracles of God. That's generally how we think of it. Oh, it's fun to talk about the Red Sea crossing, and I'm not going to argue with you. It's fun to talk about when Jesus performs these mighty miracles in his ministry, and I'm not going to argue with you. But to me, just me, when I think about God's providence in action, when I think about the ways in which God, not supernaturally, but just naturally, involves himself in this world's affairs in order to accomplish his will, that blows my mind even more. Because of course God can split the Red Sea. Of course God can make the walls of Jericho fall. Of course God in the flesh can walk on water to a boat in the middle of a storm. Of course God can do those things. He's God. He made nature. He can supersede it. He made it. He can break it, or at least suspend it for a time when he wants to do something that is typically impossible. So of course he can do the impossible. He's God. I can't wrap my mind around how he does it, but I can easily wrap my mind around that he does it. But providence just continues to blow my mind, because that involves God not breaking any of the ordinary laws of nature that he put in place, that he established in creation. those systems of physics and biology and the orderliness of the universe that he created in the beginning, that he works with, not against like he does with miracles, but works with and through in order for us, the recipients of it, not to see it in front of us, like you see the Red Sea parting and you say, wow, look at that miracle, but rather with providence, you turn around and you say, wow, look where I am. How did I get here? And you turn around and you see this very strange, windy path where a lot of actions were taken, some by you, by your free will, some by other people, which you had no control over, and by their free will. And yet, as a result of that odd, strange, winding path, you are now standing where you are, ready to be blessed by God. And along the way, there were good times and bad, ups and downs, hurdles and challenges, and blessings and happiness. But it is a winding path of your life that has put you where you are, and you as a God-fearing person, you as a God-minded person, look at that and say, this was not a circumstantial thing. This was not a happenstantial thing. This was not chance, luck, karma, or dogma. This was the result of a divine mind and a divine hand guiding things to get me, little insignificant me, to where I am so that I could be blessed the way he wants me to be, when and how he wants me to be. And that blows my mind. Because it's easy just to split the sea and tell me to walk across it. But to put me in that position where I don't have to walk across the split sea, but rather there's a bridge there that I didn't know was there that I wouldn't have found if I hadn't have turned left that one time and someone else turned right and interrupted me and caused me to turn some other way and I just went along the path. I cannot help but say, God did that. God put me there. God allowed that to happen. How did he do that? There was not a single supernatural event. How did he do that? He did it by providence. It's a hard thing sometimes to grasp. So I thought we should have a sermon to discuss it. It is usually the case where every couple of years we'll have a new converts class. We're not having one this year. We didn't have one last year, I don't think, so maybe we'll try and have one next year. But we have had a lot of new converts here at this congregation over the past year or so. And so I think it's good and appropriate to every now and then just stop and have not a very glamorous sermon, but just have a kind of a meat and potatoes, basics. Let's just understand this simple thing. So let's talk about providence, which is no simple thing to understand, but it's a very fundamental kind of Bible topic. I have 4 things to share with you, the first of which kind of helps us define our terms. Let's look at one particular text that illustrates the difference between providence and miracles. That difference we talked about earlier about nature versus supernatural. Let's see that in action. Look at Numbers chapter 22, verses 26 through 28. This is the account of Balaam and the donkey, which we studied in a sermon late last year, but we can come back to it just to understand it here. The angel of the Lord went further and stood in a narrow place where there was no way to turn either to the right or to the left. And when the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she fell down under Balaam. Now there's more, but you see the part that I've highlighted behind me. The angel of the Lord, a being sent by God to interfere on behalf of Balaam, really to interfere against Balaam in this case, because Balaam is on his way, having been bribed to go as a prophet of sorts, to speak curses against the nation of Israel, which God's will says, no, we're not going to do that. So God is going to interfere in Balaam and stop Balaam from doing something he doesn't want him to do. God has that right. God is a free will being as well as we are. So God can say, no, I'm not going to let you do that. I'm going to stop you by my will. So he is doing that by sending an angel to stop Balaam. Now, is this miracle or providence? Let's keep going in the text. The donkey sees the angel and falls down under Balaam. And Balaam's anger is kindled, and he strikes the donkey with a staff. And the Lord opens the mouth of the donkey, and the donkey says to Balaam, what have I done unto you that you have struck me these 3 times? And Balaam says, because you won't do what I say. And he talks to the donkey like it's no big deal, which is just hilarious. Is that a miracle or providence? That one, I think, is a little easier to spot, right? Because ordinarily, naturally, particularly, typically, a donkey cannot talk. And I don't mean the sound that they make, which is not speaking. It's not speech. It has no inflections. It has no form or subtlety or deviations. He has no vocal cords. He has no musculature. He has no ability to form words the way we do. And yet God takes what is naturally impossible and makes it possible. He supersedes his own laws of nature, and he interjects a voice to come out of that donkey to ask Balaam why he keeps hitting him. That's miracle. But before When the donkey sees an angel of the Lord and says, well, I can't go this way and I can't go that way, and I'm not going that way because that angel's carrying a knife or a sword. So what does the donkey do? Just collapses so that Balaam can't go forward. Is that a miracle? No. That's providence. Now, it is an amazing deed by God whenever he does anything. He is a supreme being. Anything he does is remarkable. When he sends an angel, it's remarkable. Angels themselves are remarkable. But the miracle is not the angel being there. The providence is not the angel being there. The providence is the donkey just not going forward. Because there's nothing supernatural about a donkey deciding I'm not going to do what my master wants. That's all donkeys. This donkey says, I can't go left, I can't go right, I can't go forward, so I'll just collapse. And that's a perfectly normal thing for a donkey to do. But the donkey did it because God intervened and caused that donkey to do a perfectly normal thing. That's God's providence in action. That's God saying, I don't want you to do that. That is against my will. I'm going to stop you from doing that, but I'm not going to do something miraculously. I'm not going to send a thunderbolt. I'm not going to swallow you up in the whole of the earth. Things which God has done. He's not going to rain down fire and brimstone. I'm just going to send an angel that only the donkey can see, who's going to say, and the donkey's going to go, it just collapse. God can do that. That's not miraculous. That's natural. That's providence. Now, I'm not saying every time you turn left when you wanted to turn right, or every time you're driving down the highway and your GPS glitches out and tells you to turn which way and you shouldn't have turned the other way, that it was some angel directing your GPS to do that. I'm not saying that. Although having said that, because I didn't prepare this part of the sermon, having said that, it's not out of the realm of possibility based on Balaam and the donkey. Your GPS is essentially donkey in the scenario. That's not my point. My point is, I'm not saying every time it happens that it's providence. My point is that it does happen where you find yourself somewhere you didn't plan to be, or not somewhere where you planned to be. And every now and then you might turn around and see the path that puts you here. And you might conclude, maybe I should rethink what I'm doing here. Maybe God wants or doesn't want me to do what I'm doing. In which case you are appreciating the power of God's providence as opposed to him just miraculously stopping you. Now, there are 3 texts in your Bible that we typically cite related to providence. Let's look at them in turn. The first one comes from Genesis chapter 50. This is helping us understand providence as it involves actions by ungodly people, or at least doing ungodly things, doing unrighteous deeds to you and hurting you, and yet still can be part of providence. Genesis 50, 17 through 20 is the reading, but just to catch you up, in case you've forgotten, this is Joseph. Joseph's brothers, jealous over the affection they perceive their parents, or at least their father, giving their brother, decide to be rid of him. And so they concoct a plan, hatch a scheme, at first to kill him, but then when that isn't going to happen, they're happy just to be rid of him. And as a result of some particular curious circumstances, Joseph ends up being sold into bondage, and the brothers think they're done with him for good. They wash their hands of it and go home. And Joseph goes on a little journey in life with a lot of bad and a lot of harsh and a lot of negative and a lot of difficult things that he has to go through. But in the end, he catches the eye of Pharaoh. By the power of God, he starts interpreting dreams that helps Pharaoh. And he ascends up the hierarchy ladder of Egypt to the point where he becomes Pharaoh's number 1 guy, or Pharaoh's 1, he's the number 2 guy in all the land of the most powerful kingdom on earth at the time. A remarkable series of circumstances had to happen to get Joseph from being just a son in a small clan in a tiny land to being the second most important person in the most powerful kingdom on earth. A lot of weird things had to happen, had to just go right, even when they were going bad in the moment, for this to be Joseph's fate. Quotation marks, air quotes, air quotes. Then his brothers endure a famine in their homeland. They solicit the help of Pharaoh in Egypt. And when they go there, they find the brother that they intended to kill or at least be done with for good has now risen to such a point where he has the power of life and death in his hands that he might wield against them. And thus we pick up the narrative. Genesis 50, verse 17. So shall you say to Joseph, forgive, I pray thee now, the trespasses of your brethren, and for their sin. For they did unto you evil. And now we pray you, forgive the trespass of the servants of God your father. And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. And his brethren went and fell down before his face. And they said, behold, we be your servants. In other words, please don't kill us. We'll serve you. And Joseph said, fear not. Am I in the place of God? For as for you, you thought evil against me. Now what does it say? But God meant it for good, to bring it to pass as is this day, to save much people alive. Question, did God cause Joseph to go through all the difficulty he went through? To go into bondage, to be thrown into prison, to be accused falsely, to rise into sin. Did God cause all of that, especially all the bad things? Did God cause his brothers to hate him? Did God cause his brothers to throw him in a pit? Did God cause the brother, Joseph, to be sold into bondage? Did God cause all of those things? No. Joseph's brothers caused those things. Other people made their own free will choices, but it was the evil actions of his brothers that set that ball in motion. However, did Joseph's brothers intend for that weird, windy path to end with Joseph in a position where he could help them? No, they didn't intend that either. God did, though. God didn't cause the bad. God used the bad. And God said, I can take you on this journey that other people have helped you be on, that your own choices have put you on, that other people have caused you to be on, but I can let it steer and guide you to be where I want you to be so that you, with your power and authority, can save your people and thus save the promise that I made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God used that. Despite the fact that Joseph was suffering adversity for most of that, along that journey and all of those left turns and all those downward slopes, if he had foresight, he could say, God has a plan for me. But here's the thing. None of us have foresight. None of us can know that. We can turn around and we can see the proverbial road that we're on with all the down and all the down. We see where we are, and where we are right now is a valley. Where we are right now is another pitfall. And it would be very easy and very tempting to say, I'm just always going to have hardship. But you don't know what God has planned. And you don't know what evil has been done to you could be used by God to save you and to save other people through you and to help the world with you. That's the power of the providence of God. How he can use other people's actions, even if they're evil, to accomplish what is ultimately his great good. Here's another one from the Old Testament. This one's Esther. Background here, this is Esther 4, 11 through 14. But the background is Esther is a Jewish woman, young lady, living in Persia at the time when the Jews are a captive people. The Babylonians took them, then the Persians conquered Babylon, and now some of the Jews are in Chaldea still, and some have been carried into Persia, and Esther's there. She's with the king. And as a result of some particular curious circumstances, finds herself catching the eye of the king and being married by the king to become a queen of Persia. This little Jewish girl becomes a queen of Persia. Along the same time, around that time, this rando Persian gets, someone bumps into him, and he scuffs up his pretty suit, and he decides, I want to slaughter all the Jews. He gets one tiny little slight, and he decides he wants to go on a rampage, have a little Holocaust of his own, and kill all the Jews in Persia, if not in Chaldea as well. And so the Jews being threatened, God must intervene. How does he intervene? Not with miracles. He doesn't swallow up Haman in the earth. He doesn't send fire from heaven to consume him. Rather, he uses the natural order of things. Mordecai, a Jew, goes to Esther and says, go to the king, go to your husband, and appeal for the safety of your people. Now there's a catch there. Listen to the text. Esther 4, 11 through 14. All the king's servants, this is Esther talking, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, comes to the king in the inner court who is not called, there is one law to put him to death unless the king holds out his golden scepter that he may live. Let's just pause right there. Well, keep going actually. But I have not been called to come to the king in some 30 days. Okay, pause. So there's this rule that the king has in place, where if you are not bidden, if you are not invited, the king didn't want you to come into his presence, and you just show up and start walking in like you own the place, if the king doesn't raise his golden scepter toward you as if to say, you're welcome to talk to me, then it's off with your head. Just like that, it doesn't matter who you are, man, woman, child, or queen. And Esther knows that. And she says, he hasn't summoned me in a month. And you want me just to walk in there and beg for something? I might die. Okay. Mordecai's answer. Then Mordecai answered Esther like this. Do not think with yourself that you shall escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. What's that now? Yeah, you might die. For if you altogether hold your peace at this time, there shall come enlargement and deliverance arising to the Jews from some other place. What's he saying? You may coward out. You may chicken out. You may say, I don't have the faith to step in there and trust that God will protect me. I don't have the faith. If I go, I might die. Yes, you might. What happens if you do nothing? Here's what happens if you do nothing. Haman will have his plot succeed, probably, and we'll all die. But for some other place, and some other time, and some other way, God will raise up salvation for the Jews. Some other way, God's will is going to be done. This might just be some big, giant speed bump that you could help us overcome if you don't step up to the plate, if you cowered out, if you don't go to the king, if you just stay back in the shadows, then we might all die. But there will still be a remnant, there will still be a core, there will still be something from which God can make his people and from which comes the Messiah. From some other way and some other time, God's will be done. But you might be the way in which God's will is done now. Keep going. There will come some other way, enlargement, deliverance to the Jews from some other place. But you and your father's house shall be destroyed. And who knows whether you are come to the kingdom for such a time as this? He asked that question. We say that sometimes too. We're talking about things we don't understand, and we say, who knows? And what we say, when we say that is, nobody knows. Who knows? Nobody knows. Somebody knows. Mordecai knows who knows. When he says who knows, he wants Esther to realize somebody does know. Who is it? Who knows? God knows. God knows. Esther doesn't know. She's looking at the winding path of her life, the remarkable set of circumstances that led her to being queen of Persia, a position that does not happen by chance, doesn't happen by happenstance, doesn't happen by dogma or karma. It happens because God put her there. She needs to appreciate that. She needs to have so much faith in God, therefore, and take that next step that is laid up before her. She can't see it. She can only see what has happened before. And what has happened before is a series of events that have put her here. And Mordecai says, you're here because God put you here. So take that step in there. Yes, he might kill you, but you know what? He might not. And you might save all the people. He might not kill you. Who knows? God knows. And who is God but the one that has put you here? So have faith and take that step. Be bold and daring and courageous, recklessly courageous to step where there is no land, and trust that God will put there land for you. Because he's got you this far and not for nothing. Because God doesn't do things for nothing. So if here by his providence you are, then take the next step by his providence and save his people. Because who knows? This might be why you're here, to do that. Now listen, not everything, as I said before, not everything that happens to you happens for a reason. Sometimes your dog just dies. But sometimes you are where you are by a series of circumstances to accomplish the will of God that you don't know, that you can't see, that is laid out only in the mind of the Eternal One. But you have a part to play. You might not play it. Esther might not be the first one. It could have been someone else who was a possible savior of the people in Persia who didn't step up to the plate, and Esther is the one that Mordecai references as some other way in some other time in some other place. Someone else will come to help the people. She might have been that some other one, and if she fails, someone else will come up, because one way or another, God's will be done. And you, listening to me, you might be a way in which God's will is accomplished. And you might not step up to that plate. You might not walk through that door. And guess what? God's will still be done through some other means. But you will have missed out on the privilege to be an active participant in fulfilling the will of God. Don't miss that boat. Have some faith. Take that step. And let God use you to accomplish his will. And then it'll still be God who gets all the credit. But you will get the satisfaction of knowing God did that, and he used lowly me because I was faithful. Last one. It's from our reading. Philemon. Let's read 10 through 16. The background to this, Onesimus was a runaway slave. It's a charged word. What it meant back then was Onesimus apparently owed some debt to Philemon. He didn't pay it. He was supposed to work off that debt as a bondservant in the house, work off the debt. But as happens sometimes, he decided he didn't want to work it off, either at all or anymore. And so he skedaddles. He leaves town. Runs away. So he doesn't have to pay that debt off. And by a series of curious, particular circumstances, he finds his way as a runaway to the audience of Paul the Apostle, who teaches him the gospel, baptizes him into Jesus Christ, and through that action has all of his sins. What's another word for sins that the Master uses a lot? Debts. Forgiven. Now, according to Philemon, Onesimus owes him whatever it was he was supposed to work off. According to Jesus, that debt's been washed away. So we have to reconcile between these two people. So Paul writes a letter to Philemon on behalf of his brother, and actually Philemon's brother, Onesimus. In the midst of that, here's the way Paul approaches it. Philemon, starting in verse 10. I beseech you for my son, not his literal blood son, but it's what he called people he converted. For my son Onesimus, whom I have begotten in my bonds, which in time past was to you unprofitable, but now is profitable to you and to me, whom I have sent again. He sends him back to him. Probably with this letter, whom I've sent again, that you should receive him as you would receive my own bowels, the old Bible says. Receive him with the same kind of love and affection that you would have for me. Whom I have retained with me, that in your stead he might have ministered unto me in the bonds of the gospel. But without my mind would I do nothing, that your benefit should not be as it were of necessity, but willingly. I am asking you to want to do this. For perhaps, echoing Mordecai, who knows? God knows. Perhaps he therefore departed for a season, for perhaps this happened so that you should receive him forever, not as a servant, but above a servant, a brother beloved, especially to me, but how much more now to you, both in the flesh and to the Lord. These curious, odd circumstances that put this guy, a sinner, who ran away from a saint's bondservant allegiance and legal obligation, that he ran away from the saint's legal obligation into the hands of another saint who taught him and helped him to obey the gospel. Those curious circumstances, Paul does not attribute to luck. He does not attribute to fate or to the universe balancing things or to karma or dogma or happenstance or chance. See, people in the world use that terminology because they refuse to credit God. They refuse to concede there's a mind at work. And so they say the universe is doing this and the universe is writing things. The universe has no mind to judge and to balance scales. God made the universe. God uses, sometimes he supersedes miracles, but sometimes he uses the universe to make things right and to accomplish his will. It's not fate or chance. It's the providence of God. Now, Paul doesn't know that. It would be presumptuous to say that. So he says, perhaps. I think he's got an inkling. So he says, perhaps. He left you so he could find me, so that I could send him back to you, not as a servant, but as a brother. He goes on to say, Paul does, that whatever he still owes you, I'll pay it. But listen, guys, Philemon knows Paul doesn't have a cent to his name. He cannot pay that debt. And Paul knows he can't, and Paul knows Philemon knows he can't. What's Philemon going to do when he receives Onesimus? He's going to do what the Master said in the model prayer. When he taught us to pray, and he said, pray like this, Father, among other things, forgive us our debts as we forgive those who are indebted to us. You owe me something, but I'm going to wipe it clean. Philemon is going to say, Onesimus, that debt is washed. You don't owe it anymore. See, it's not about some cruel action. It's not some, curse word that he spoke or some murder that he committed. Salvation washes it all away. Now, the federal government is not as kind as Philemon, so they're still going to hold you accountable to paying off your debts. But Philemon is a Christian, and Paul is appealing to his Christianity, and he's saying, Providence has put him before you again. Forgive him the debt. Receive him as a brother. That's Providence in action. That's what Paul's saying here. He's saying, look at what's happening before our very eyes. You can't see it. It's not splitting the Red Sea. You can look back and see where you are, but you can only see it through faith. You can only see it through circumstance. You can only see it through a belief that we might be in the middle of something. Something might be happening here. I don't know. Perhaps. Who knows? God knows. I don't know. But I believe. And so I'll step forward and I'll do this thing. If I'm Philemon, that means I'll forgive this debt. And I'll receive him as a brother. Because that's Providence leading me to that. Let me leave you with some bullet points. What have we learned today? Providence only steers us toward righteousness. What I mean by that is, if you look back at that windy path and you're standing at that precipice and you have the next step to take and one path is evil, you don't get to say, I think the providence of God is leading me to do this evil thing. No, it never does that. The providence of God, sometimes bad things happen, but it only leads you toward the will of God, which is always ever good, ultimately. That being said, along the way of the providential journey, you might have those hard times. You might be in those valleys. You might have those difficulties, in which case you're very right to say, and you should say, I'm in this pit, I'm in this valley, things are very bad, but God might have a plan for me. I need to tough it out. Hold on. Keep marching forward, because he might be able to use this to accomplish his will. Providence, as I've said now many times, and for the last time I'll say, it's only in hindsight. to see what the plan is ahead of you, you just have to have faith. You can't see it. You don't know. You just have to trust that there is a reward waiting for you. Finally, there are coincidences. There are. You flip a coin, it's going to land heads or tails. 99 times out of 100, it doesn't matter. But, sometimes the lot falls toward Matthias, Acts chapter 1. And that was the will of God. Sometimes you flip a coin, and Matthias called heads, and he won. He got the apostleship because that was the will of God. And we say, was that just a coincidence? Is that just chance? Sometimes. Sometimes it's random. Sometimes it's the will of God. Christians who have eyes of faith are always looking for what God might be doing. It's easy to spot a miracle. Providence takes a person who has eyes trained to see God. So I pray that for you. If you're here this morning and you're not a Christian, perhaps, who knows? I don't know. God knows. Maybe you have been put here as a result of yours and others' free will choices that put you in this pew this morning. Maybe you haven't been coming for a while. Maybe you are a Christian and you're not faithful. Or maybe you're not a Christian and you used to come a lot, but you stopped coming and now you're back again. Listen, you need to obey the gospel. You need to repent. And if you're not a Christian, be baptized to be made right with God. Who knows? Maybe you're supposed to have heard this sermon to encourage you to step forward right now. If so, do so as we stand and sing.